Hi guys, Mike here. Welcome to episode 15 of the Endless Runner series. In this episode, we will implement lives of our run character. So let's get started. So in the editor, let's focus on adding our lives to the HUD. Open it up. And what we need to do is add our hearts icon and a text. So let's drag in an image, move it back here, select our heart. Maybe move this down a little bit and resize that heart back here. Let's anchor it to the top right and add another text, our text block. Add an initial value of 2, for example, and we make it the same size, so 45 as the coin count, and set its alignment to the right. So add it like this. Give this a name, so we called our coins count, so now we need to call this lives count, create a variable out of it, compile, save, and now let's go into code and bind this widget. So in our game HUD.h, let's copy this, paste it, and call it lives count. And what we can do is what we need. We had set coins count, so let's copy this as well. We need this later and call it set lives count. Implement this and say exactly what it's here. Just copy this and say lives count. So it's similar as the coins count, and we will call this later from an event that we create in the game mode. So let's compile this and see that the binding works. Now let's head back over to our editor and go into our graph to see that the variable is not there, so the binding worked, no compile issues, so everything is set up. And now let's add lives to our game HUD. You might be wondering why not the character, because the game HUD, it controls everything, the game rules for this level, and so it will collect the count of lives, of coins count, and so on. So let's just head over to our game mode, and for the lives we need two variables, one for the number of lives or the current lives and the max lives. So let's copy just this and call this number of lives, and another one max lives equals 3, and we make this edit anywhere, because in the blueprints we can then change the number as we want. So make this edit anywhere. Now we have our max lives, and now what we need to do is what we did with the coins. We need another event, so copy this and call it on lives count change and call this lives count. And down here we create a variable for that event and call that on lives count changed. And what we can do now is go to our HUD, and the same that we did with the coins count change in the initialized HUD, let's do the same for the lives count change. So copy this and say lives count changed dot add dynamic, and we are setting our lives count. So now this is hooked up. So we have our lives count added to the game mode event. And now what we need to figure out is, okay, what happens when the player dies? What do we need to do? And so let's just go in and start with our run character and figure out what we need to do. So what happened when the character collides with an obstacle? The death function is called. What we are doing here is disabling input, spawning our explosion and explosion sound, and then we are calling the onDeath function. And in here, the only thing that we are doing is restarting the level, but we don't want to restart the level. We want to start the character from the beginning, so from the player start position. And there's a lot of things that we need to do now to make this happen. So let's talk about this. So in essence, what we need to do is kind of like do the same thing that restart level does, but not restarting the level. So restarting the level means that all the initial values, everything is created from new. The player is spawned at the player position, and everything kind of like what we need to do in here in the game mode, for example, creating the initial floor tiles. All this is done when the restart level is called and everything is initialized. But we have lives now, so what we want to do is reduce our lives count by 1 and then place the character at its original player start position. But the thing is that we have dynamic floor tiles. They get created and destroyed. So if we would spawn our character at the player start, then he would fall to his death because there are no floor tiles there. So what we need to do is initialize everything again and create the initial floor tiles and start from fresh. This sounds easy, but it's more complicated because we still have floor tiles in the scene and we need to destroy these floor tiles and all the obstacles and coins that are in the level that we need to destroy before we can restart our character at its original position. So let's do this by saying, okay, get rid of first our restart level. And what we need to do is call our game mode. So game mode, and in the game mode we need a function that is called player died. So we need to tell the game mode the player has died, and then the game mode can do its thing by restarting everything, deleting stuff, and so on. And after that, we also add a new event that once the game mode has done all that, it then sends an event on level reset, which is listened to by the run character, and the run character will now then do its thing and enable its input again, its visibility, and set its location and stuff. So a lot to do. So let's get started by implementing the player died in the game mode. Let's go to our game mode base and create a U function. What would be similar to the add coin. Let's say void player died. Implement this, and now we need to figure out what happens when the player died. And if you can see in our run character, this should work if we call it run game mode and not game mode. So now this works fine. And in our game mode base, let's first implement the actual stuff that happens. So number of lives reduction. So let's subtract 1 from the number of lives. Then what we need to do is call our onLives or broadcast the event onLives count change dot broadcast with the number of lives so that our HUD gets updated. And then what we can check is if number of lives is greater than 0. That means we're still having lives. Else, what we would do is call game over, which we will implement in the next episode. So just something that you can see what we are doing next. So if we still have lives, what we need to do is what I mentioned. So let's put some comments in here. Iterate over all floor tiles and call destroy floor tile. What that means is we need to somehow, when we create floor tiles, add them to a collection of some sort, which will be an array, collect all the floor tiles that are in the scene, and once the character dies, we iterate over all those floor tiles and call that destroy floor tile function, and where the floor tile is responsible for destroying its obstacles and coins. And then what we need to do is empty our array. Then now that everything is gone, we need to set our spawn point that we have, the next spawn point, to an initial value, and then create our initial floor tiles. And then of course we need to tell the character that everything has been reset and now he can reset his level. So we will call or broadcast the level reset event. So this is the stuff that we need to do. Let's go into our H file and add our array to it. So in here, that's a perfect spot. Let's copy this where we have the switch values. We just need a floor tile pointer to it and call it floor tiles. And what we now need to do is once we create a floor tile, then we need to add the floor tile to this array. So let's go into our CPP file and find the spot where we add a floor tile. And if the tile in our add floor tile, if the tile is valid, then call floor tiles dot add and add the tile. And what we can do now is in our player died function, we create a for loop and say auto. So for you, if you don't have seen this yet, if you're maybe familiar with C#, with the var keyword, auto is similar. So instead of writing, let's say a floor tile star, call it tile and iterate over the floor tiles. What we can also do is use the auto keyword. So it automatically finds out what type it is and we don't have to type like the specific type in here, just in case you haven't seen this yet. So, and then we call the tile.destroy floor tile, which exists already, but there is a small issue. And when we hover over it, it says member is inaccessible because it might be protected and we can't access that function. So let's move this up to here and make this maybe blueprint callable just in case you want to call it from blueprint someday. And now this function works. Add that semicolon. So now we're iterating over our floor tiles, destroying our tiles, and now we need to empty our tile array. Floor tiles dot empty, and the next spawn point would be its initial value. So when we call it with f transform and call the default constructor, then the initial spawn point would be at 0, 0, 0. And now we can say create initial floor tiles and would then broadcast our level reset event, which we create in a short while. But there's one more thing with this kind of functionality. This happens when we die, but our floor tiles are dynamically created and destroyed. So once we destroy a floor tile, we need to actually remove it from that list. So in our game mode, we actually need another function that the floor tile can call. And let's call this, copy this, and call it void remove tile. And we need to give it a floor tile pointer because we need to remove the specific tile from the list. Implement this, and the way it would be implemented would be floor tiles dot remove and then the tile. So it will go through in the array, look for that tile and remove it. And the way to do this is when we destroy our floor tile, and destroy floor tile is not only called from here, but when it's actually destroyed through that trigger box. Let's just go into here. So what happens is if the destroy floor tile is called before we do this, then would say run game mode and call remove tile with this. So it remove this tile from the list before it destroys itself. And so now we actually have a system with the game mode that collects all the floor tiles that are spawned and handles the removal of those tiles when the player dies and when the floor tiles are destroyed. But there's one thing missing. So a floor tile can have on each of its lanes an obstacle or a coin. So we actually need to do a similar thing in here like we did in the game mode with the floor tiles. We need to collect all our, let's call them children, that are created, and we need to actually destroy them before the floor is destroyed. So let's do a similar thing. Let's create a U property. Let's copy this and remove the category and add a T array. And what we need for this is all of the children are actors. So we can use the A actor class as a base class for the T array and call it child actors. And in our CPP file, we can then add those children when we create them. So let's add child actors dot add obstacle here. Copy this. Let's add it in here, and the coin here. So now we collected every kind of child that we create. And when we destroyed the floor tile, we do something similar like we did in the game mode. We iterate over it. So create a for loop, make it auto again, call it child, colon, and the array, so child actors, and call if is valid child. So if it's still valid and not bound for destruction or null pointer, then we can say child dot destroy. And of course, before we call the run game mode, we need to empty our actors. So child actors dot empty. And this should be it for kind of like collecting and removing floors and obstacles and coins. So our whole management system of the actors that we create should work. So let's recap for a second. It's been a lot of stuff. So let's start with our floor tile. We added a child actors array. So when we create obstacles and coins, we add them to this array. And once we destroy that floor tile, then we destroy each single child and then call the run game mode remove tile to remove this tile from its collection array of tiles and then destroy tile itself. So back in our game mode base, we can see we destroy the floor tiles and everything in here then works like this. We empty our floor tiles, set the next spawn point, and create our initial floor tiles. And now what we need to do is create that event and make the player or the run character then reset its position and reset the input again, so that with this stuff, what restart level would do in some ways, now we did on our own. So let's just add the event, and this event doesn't have any parameters, so let's copy just this. So you can see with multicast delegates, when you look at it, they have up to 8 or can have up to 9 parameters, and the single one you would declare just like this. So, and we call it F on level reset. So we don't need any parameters for that. And then kind of like create our variable for the event and call on reset, on level reset, on level reset. And in our game mode base, now we can say on level reset dot broadcast. And in this case, there's no parameters, so we don't pass any parameters. So we're getting close to finally seeing the result. And let's go into our run character to hook up that event and create our function. So let's do this first. This could be a protected function like we did here. Copy this, call it void reset level. Implement this. And then in our begin play method, we call run game mode on level reset, add dynamic, this, and then say a run character dot reset level or colon colon reset level. So the one thing to do still is implementing this function over here. Let's move it beneath the onDeath function and implement the level reset. So what we need to do now is say we are not dead anymore, enable our input, reset our visibility, and then we need to set our location and rotation based on the player start. And you might think, but how do we get the player start? And this is something we can do by using a gameplay statics method. But before we do this, we need a variable to hold our player start. So let's add one more uProperty to our class. So this could also be protected. We don't have to access it from somewhere else. So it's a uProperty. We forward declared as a player start. So there's an actual class called a player start. It's an actor in the scene, and we call it player start. And now in our begin play, after we added our dynamic function, we need to get the player start, initialize it. So we would do this like player start equals cast and cast it to a player start. And there's a function in the gameplay statics, which you've probably seen in blueprints as well, where you can get all actors or of a specific class or get a certain actor of class, and you get back the actor that you need to cast then. So we do the same thing. So you gameplay statics and say get actor of class. One thing to note is these get actor of class or get actors of class, they are a little bit performance heavy, so I wouldn't do it in a tick or in a for loop. That's why in begin play, just when the game begins, we just initialize stuff by getting these values and setting them to variables. So we actually do them once and don't do this all the time. That's a good thing to do. So performance heavy code, always kind of like place them in variables that you can reuse if they don't change, if they're in the game, getting classes, getting objects in the game. Do them in the beginning, in begin play, but don't do them while the game is playing in some functions that may even be called several times and so on. So performance heavy stuff should be done once and the values should be cached in variables. This as a side note. So we call get world, and what we need to find is the T subclass of, like what you've seen with other classes where we defined a T subclass of that we set a specific blueprint class to, like the widgets and stuff that we create. So to find these classes or specific class, we need to specify the class of the actor that we want to find. So when we specify a T subclass of as a property, then we can set it in blueprints. But now how do we get the specific class for player start? And there's in C++ for each class that you create, that you use, there is a static function. Let's call player start and colon colon, and it's called static class. It's a function call which returns the actual class of the specific ones that we're using. So if we have our floor tile, you would say a floor tile colon colon static class, and the static class would return for this one. So this is how we can set and get our player start. And now in our reset level, we can now check for if player start, if this actually returned the value, and if it is, we set actor location to the player start, get actor location, and set actor rotation. And we can do this by player start.get actor rotation. And to be able to access these functions, to get no compile issues, Rider automatically included the game framework player start. So if you don't have automatic inclusion of those header files, so you can see for the player start, we need to include the game framework /player start.h file. So what we need to do next is what I mentioned before. We need to say we are not dead anymore. So we set the Boolean value to false. We enable our input and we don't need to specify a player controller for that. And then we need to also get our mesh and set its visibility to true again. So this is actually it, but there's one thing before we compile, there's one thing that we need to do in our game mode base. We actually need to initialize our number of lives to the value of the max value, so that actually our number of lives is not zeros, but it is the max lives. And in our game HUD, of course, one thing that we need to do is also we are setting our lives count not with 0, but with run game mode max lives. So now let's compile and test this out. So let's head over to our editor, hit play. You can see we have an issue with the anchor again, but we had 3 lives. Now it's restarting. We have 2 lives. Let's still collect. Let's die again. We have 1 life. And next would be 0 lives. Now, because we didn't implement our game over, it explodes and explodes again because that one special branch of the if-else statement does not work. So this actually works. But let's fix that issue with the game HUD and add the anchor of the text. You can see it's still on the upper left. Let's put it to the upper right. Compile, save, test this out again. Now it works. So we have 3 lives, we die, we have 2 lives, and so on. So lives work. It was a big episode, a lot of content, a lot to do, but we delete our stuff that we create. We have our respawning at the player start with the initial tiles and so on. So yeah, our lives count now actually works. And the next episode, I guess we will implement the game over so that once the life count reaches 0, a death menu pops up where you can say restart or go to the main menu. So thank you for watching. I hope you really liked this video. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. I will gladly answer them. And please like, subscribe, and hit the bell to get notified when new episodes are coming out. This would really help me. So thanks again and see you in the next one.